apparently all countries, even the countries in the European Union, have different cultures and society systems. And from what you have experienced, what are some clear differences within countries in government and diplomatic systems? And what do you think is the factor that has the greatest influence on the system?
Okay. So I will start maybe with the situation in the European Union, and maybe I will try and draw a few comparisons between, the European Union and Korea. So the European Union, to start with, we have a motto which is united in our diversity. And we basically pride ourselves of the fact that within the European Union you have, as you point out, different cultures and different societies. We have 24 different languages to start with, but also we have political systems that are slightly different. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think we have, for example, eight member states that are actually monarchies, and others, they're parliamentary monarchies, obviously. But others have different systems. We have some federal states within the European Union, and others that are not. So we're also trying to preserve those differences, because we think it's a little bit like biodiversity. We think this is also useful for the resilience of the European Union. Of course, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Sometimes I'm asked what is the most difficult challenge that you face in your job. And I would say, working in a multicultural working environment, because it's not just the language issue. I'm a French national, and increasingly I have to work in English. But also many of my colleagues here, for example, have a different nationality. And that is sometimes a challenge, because beyond the fact that you're using a common language that is not necessarily your mother tongue, culturally, there are differences, and in our behavior, day-to-day behavior, this can also be a challenge, that we have to make sure that we are actually talking about the same thing. I will give you a very mundane example. When it comes to physical contact, there are some cultures in Europe where it is okay to actually touch people. You can touch them on the arm or whatever. And there are other cultures where people simply do not touch. So you have to be careful also when you interact with people and with your body language, that this is not misinterpreted. Now, when it comes to, for example, our work here in Korea, it's also very interesting, because of course there are many major cultural differences, because of the history of the country being very different from the history of Europe and the European Union. However, you always have two ways of looking at things. For example, when you travel, you can focus on the differences, and that is can be enriching if that doesn't bear a value judgment, like you don't think one culture is superior to another. So you have to approach it with an open mind. But you can also look at the similarities between cultures. So then again, to go back to two aspects, one being the historical aspect. There again, I think it's very clear in the first video that we watched, the second one as well, that we faced historically very similar challenges. You saw that the European Union, that Europe was totally ravaged after the Second World War. That feeding people was the main issue, and this is something I think that would resonate with this country. And if you look at the challenges as well that both the EU and Korea are facing, you have the challenge of globalization. Here we talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, but you also have societal challenges that are very similar in Europe and in Korea. And I will mention one in particular, which is demographic change. We have many discussions with our Korean counterparts to actually look at some of the causes of this phenomenon of demographic aging, but also how to address this issue and the consequences of the impact that this may have on our societies. And then again, it's very interesting to see that if you're trying to identify the causes and the policies, well, they are very similar, both in Europe and in Korea. And I will mention one root cause, which is basically the status of women in our respective societies. Half jokingly, I always refer to Spain, which is a country that very rapidly saw a decline in its birth rate. And I say, when Spanish women were told, highly educated women, that basically they had the choice between a career and a family, many of them decided to go for a career. And they said, well, okay, then we forget about having a family and children. And somehow I feel that in Korea as well, this is not the only cause, but this is a very powerful reason why Korean women may decide not to get married and have families, because they may feel that this will be an impediment to their career. So, I mean, I just want to mention those very concrete examples to show that multicultural societies are actually a strength, and also that we're facing very similar challenges within the European Union as well as here in Korea. Thank you.